So yesterday, I recorded a presentation for our local Sand and Soil Garden Club that I'm a member at, of a good friend of mine, Don Marshall, came out to speak. And unfortunately, the quality of the video is not that great. I didn't have the camera in a very good spot. I'm gonna get better at this as I go. But the audio is excellent and the content is amazing. So I've known Don since I was a kid, actually. He was good friends with my parents. He actually is the reason I went back to school to take courses in botany, was because I knew he was retiring and I wanted to take his classes, and he is one of the most amazing educators I've ever met. And in fact, I'm actually working on an online botany course with him that we hope to release soon for folks like myself and other gardeners who want to learn this stuff but don't have the time or frankly the inclination to go back to school to take these classes. So I have some notes here from my introduction that I cut off when I did this recording, so I'm going to do it now. Don has dedicated his life to teaching students about how plants grow and bridging the gap between botany and practical horticulture applications. Don is the founder of the Environmental Horticulture program at Lake Washington Institute, where he taught for over 40 years. In addition to teaching, Don is a Certified Professional Horticulturalist, ecoPro, and Certified Arborist. He owned and operated Plant Designs, a landscape design, installation, and maintenance firm specialized in organic fine gardening. Don also co-authored Home Landscaping, Northwest Region, published by Creative Homeowner, now in its 4th printing. So again, I just want to say, I know this isn't the best angle on the recording, but the audio is excellent and Don is amazing, so I hope you enjoy. Thanks.
Guy running around with at his parents' nursery and stuff, and so it's so fun to work with him, and so fun to see him doing gardening and stuff like that. Even my kids are now starting to garden. My daughter asked me if tomatoes were coming back next year. I had to say, "Where did you grow up? Are you kidding me?" But I didn't say that. I just said, "Wow, no, I don't think so." Anyway, so Ted asked me to speak on fruit tree pruning. Is that right? Yeah. In November? I said, November? I said, that's not the time to talk about. He said, well, that's what they want. They want to hear about fruit tree pruning. I thought, is that what you really want to hear about, is fruit tree pruning?
Any pruning.
Yes, any. Okay,
to make
so.
things look nicer.
Okay, so, well, to make things look nicer, well, even fruit tree pruning can do that as well. So what I've done is I'm a teacher, and everything I do is that way, I brought a quiz for you. And so it's on the sideboard right over there, labeled 1 through 6, and you can take the test. The answer's on the back. So if you want to, because I thought, okay, when we're talking fruit trees, unless you know what it is, how can you prune it? You've got to know what it is, But then I started thinking about, okay, if we're going to talk fruit trees, no, I don't want to talk fruit trees yet. I want to go through the seasons. I want to go through a year in the life of a plant. Because unless you really understand what is a plant and what is this organism doing, and this would take like 10 minutes to just get you all on ground zero. And it really came home to me when my next door neighbor, those are often the most difficult, aren't they, said to me, well, my prune tree has never fruited. It doesn't fruit at all. And yours fruit. I don't understand it. I thought, well, let's have this conversation again. I said, the reason your tree is not fruiting is because you have people come and shear them. And when did they come and shear them? 2 weeks ago. Fruit trees bloom on last year's wood. And if you prune all last year's wood off, then the stupid tree won't fruit. It's not the stupid tree. It's the owner. Anyway, I go through this. I said, you need to think about this. You need to think about when you prune determines when you have fruit. And I would run across this many, many times when I was consulting, when I had my own business. And in my head, I never said it to clients, but in my head I always think, you're not thinking like a plant. You're not thinking like what is going on here. Instead, so I thought, I'd try to teach people to think critically. So I'm going to do that for you today. And if you look on your handout, some of the things got cut off. But go to the back page that starts with, I think, when to lightly prune, hard prune, fertilize, transplant. Do you see that? at the top of one page. And there's extra handouts. Where are the extras?
Did you bring any books to sign?
I didn't. I should have.
You're gonna have to come.
No, this is my, I don't have any copies. If you could just look on with somebody and she'll,
We might be out of copies.
we're out of copies.
Email you a copy later.
Okay.
I didn't expect this many people to start.
So you guys could share a little. Okay, so on the top of that page somewhere, write the months of the year. Okay, just so you know, this is January, represents January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September. Okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to say, all right, let's think about a plant. I'm in my yard, I'm in my garden, and there's my rose bush, or there's my weigela, whatever you want to say. What's really going on with you? So let's start, and all the answers are down on this column, and so you could also put the months by those also if you wanted to. So we're gonna talk about this. So dormancy. When is dormancy? Winter, which is, let's say, January. Okay, so January, we're in winter. And we're going to talk about an average year, which I know with climate change, there is no average year anymore. Every year is a 100-year flood or whatever. So we're going to basically talk about, okay, what's really going on? So right now, January, it's dormant. The plant is dormant. Is the plant dead? No. The plant is still respiring, meaning it's still carrying on growth processes. Root growth may be growing in the ground even if it's above freezing. If it's like 40, 42 degrees in the soil, roots continue to grow, even though there's not top growth. Okay, so there's still interactions going on. You know that plant is alive. How do you know if something's alive or dead? You scratch the bark with your fingernail. Comes up brown, it's dead. If it comes up green, it's alive. How many times have you looked at your raspberries and thought, I don't know if this is alive or dead? And you scratch it and go, whoa, it's alive. I would have cut that out. Okay, so we're dormant here. In February, what's going on? Dormancy, and maybe by the end of February, things are starting to come out of dormancy. We're talking internally within the plant. You may not be seeing it, but internally the plant is starting to go through dormancy. The plant is a responder. Responder to what? Day length, temperature, day temperature, night temperature, light intensity, those kind of things. So the plant's a responder. Well, you know the end of January, you know, don't you always think if I could just get through January 31st, I'm home free? Yeah. Because November and December can be so gray and so dark, okay? So really the plant is feeling that way also. So starting in February, it's getting a little warmer. Plant processes are starting to kick in gear. You're saying, well, I don't see anything growing. You're right, you're not seeing anything growing at that time. Starting at about March, we start to get a growth surge. Buds start to swell. You can see it. You can see it in your plants. Buds start to swell. Of course, bulbs are blooming, those kinds of things. We start to get this growth surge in March and in April. And man, in April, we get a growth surge, don't we? It's like, whoa, things start to go. You know, they start to move, they start to grow. You can see the new growth coming. We may get in April and in May, we may get some flowers if it's a spring bloomer. You start to get the azaleas and the rhodies and the early rhodies and all kinds of things starting to come in. The forsythia in February, you know, the epimedium, the plums start to bloom pretty early, the cherries bloom early. So that's going on in March and in April and in May. And possibly if it was an early spring bloomer in May, we start to get a little fruit set. Okay, you may get some fruit setting after the flowers. Sometimes the fruit is very, very small, not talking about edible, but even maple trees. You know, a red maple blooms in February. It sets its fruit in April and in May, and by June it drops it off. So some of your maple trees put on fruit, drop them off right away. And so you may be getting fruits dropping at this time of year as well. Not if you're a big leaf maple, you hold those on for a lot longer. And so what's going on in June? June, you know, I love June. It's like green month. It is so electric green. The vine maples are so bright. The Douglas firs are so bright. All of this new growth has come. It took all this time to start to grow, break dormancy, start to grow. Leaves are expanding. By June, the leaves are just really expanding, okay? Often June used to be a very rainy month, and so we would get cool temperatures, we would get rain, we used to call it January, remember? And it would be, and the leaves are really expanding. It's green month. By the time it hits May and June, the plant is exhausted. It's like, whoa, that was a lot. I just put out a lot of energy. That's when my food reserves are at the lowest ebb. That's when I'm hungriest. That's when, if I'm going to add some nutrients, especially synthetic, but if you're adding organic, the organic nutrients are going to be tied into the microbial activity, which as it starts to warm up and moisture is available, it starts releasing nutrients. Plant says, oh good, I am ready for some. Bring it on, let me eat. And so it will start absorbing a lot during this time, okay, during May and in June. If you have blueberries, for instance, by June they're starting to put on fruit, and the fruit's starting to expand because in July they're going to be ripe, okay? What happens in July? It starts to get hot. Starts to get hot, and we start to get drought. We start to get some dry periods. Last couple of years we've had that a lot earlier, haven't we? June's been very hot and sunny, but in average years, in average years, July 4th holiday is ruined by the rain, and then July 5th, it turns nice, you're back to work. Great holiday in the rain in the tent, but you're now back to work. So anyway, it gets hot, the plant starts to go through a little bit of drought stress. By August, we're in drought stress. By August, the end of July can be very sunny, very bright, very hot, not a lot of rain. The plant is starting to experience drought stress. August, it can be drought stressed. Have you seen some years it's been so hot that in August some plants kind of give up and just say, I'm going to lose, we're done. I can't support you anymore. And so some plants drop leaves in August. By the end of August, there's all kinds of hormonal changes going on in the plant, and the plant is saying, prepare for dormancy, daylight is shrinking, whoop, 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 downstream. So you don't even see it, but by the end of August, the plant is now going, okay, day length is shorter. We might even put in a few blossoms, because as you look at the distance from June out here and here, some spring bloomers put on a secondary bloom. It's not global warming or the sky is falling. I get these things. My dogwood's blooming and it's September. I knew the world was screwed up. It's like, well, no, actually they do put on a secondary bloom, and so do rhodies, and so do a lot of things up. The world is still screwed up, but it's not impacting your plants that way, okay? You still get some blooms. So by September, the plant is big into start migrating all of your nutrients and sugars and calcium, magnesium back to the plant, because it's now very aware that it's going to start losing its leaves. And the plant doesn't suddenly lose its leaves and go, whoa, what was that about? Now I've lost all these leaves? Shoot, I put all that energy into them and now they're gone. It migrates everything so that we know October, which is what? Leaf color month. October is like leaves, it's great. By the time you're seeing leaves, most of those nutrients have migrated from the leaves to the petiole, into the stem. Even scale insects are going, ooh, I think osmotic pressure is changing. Everybody, don't move. Let's go back to the main stem. This leaf is dropping and we're going with it. And so those scales can migrate back to the stem because they know those leaves are going to drop and they don't want to be on a sunken ship. So by the time those leaves drop, that leaf is just a carbon vessel. That's really all it is. And it's going to add carbon to the soil. It's going to be food for microbial activity, but it's not like, gee, we put all that energy into that leaf and now it's gone? Huh, that's too bad. It's very planned. I mean, it's a very logical thing that's going on here in response to what? Day length, temperatures, hormones, inside the plant and outside the plant. November is what? Wind month, isn't it? Wind and rain and cold. We still have some beautiful leaves, like yesterday. What a great day yesterday was. But it's still, leaves are dropping. I just got rid of some of my leaves, and when I went out this morning, it's all over again. There's leaves all over my walkway. And it's like, I thought I just got rid of those. And then what happens in December? We're back into dormancy, right? And so this is the year in the life of a plant. Knowing that, knowing the year in the life of a plant can help you make decisions on your fruit trees, on your raspberries, on whatever you're pruning. Because if I'm going to, okay, here's an example. If I have a laurel hedge that's 30 by 30, it's gotten way too big, and I want to do some drastic pruning. I don't want to take it out, but it's just gotten way too big, and I'm going to cut it down to stumps. And I've done some research, and I know that I can do that. I can take a laurel down to wood, and it will sprout from there. Well, when should I do this? When is the best time to cut my laurel hedge? Based on the year in the life of a plant, can anyone venture when would be good? December, January, February. And you guys are right on in terms of your processing of this information. This is good. You're going to want to do it during dormancy right before growth surge. February, March, right before your growth surge. Why? Because by removing all that stuff, the plant has all this stored food, which it's going to use to rejuvenate, and you've taken off 2/3 of the plant. That means this extensive root system, which has a lot of stored food in it, is going to go, wow, and it's going to come right back. It's going to go right back. So you could conceivably, by July, have enough growth where you're actually cutting some of it back and redirecting it. But I had a neighbor, my old house, I'm always thinking of neighbors because they make mistakes, I don't. But anyway, I had a neighbor who pruned a laurel hedge just like that, and he pruned it in October. And we were taking a walk, and I said, oh, great. We'll be looking at those stumps for the next year. And you know, those stumps didn't come back. It ended up, those stumps died down, ended up sending shoots. I mean, laurel's pretty hardy. Sended shoots from the base. Maybe one of them sprouted, but an awful lot of them died down. Plus, they were looking at it October, November, December, January, February, March. Every time you look at it, you go, what are you thinking? What were you thinking? You know, what were you thinking? But it's because they didn't understand the year of a life of a plant, really when to do it. You know? Okay, let's talk another example. How about fertilizing? If I'm going to fertilize my blueberries or my strawberries, you start hearing on the radio in February, oh, time to fertilize, get your fertilizer. So you throw all this fertilizer out in February, especially if it's synthetic, because synthetic is just going to be very movable with the groundwater. It's still raining. The plant doesn't need it. The plant doesn't want it. The plant uses all its energy in its growth surge with stored food. When does the plant need it? Right as it's starting to, right after its growth surge. Right after its growth surge, when it's like, whew, that was a lot of energy. Oh, good, look what's here. They just put some composted chicken manure on here, and there's a lot of nitrogen on here, and I can use that. Okay, so again, you're asking yourself when to do things. Okay, let's take another example. I had a client once who said, this small hedge outside my office, I was maintaining his office commercially every week. I was there, and he said, can you cut this hedge back? And it was a secondary walkway. It was a private walkway for him going to his office. It wasn't like a main walkway where there were customers coming in. And so I said, well, and this was like May. I said, yeah, I can do that right now. I guess it was April. I said, I could do that, but I said, in 2 months, you're going to have to pay me to do it again. He said, I don't want to pay you to do it again. I said, well, right now, the plant is going through a growth surge. So if I prune that right now, it's going to respond by going, and then you're going to be unhappy again in a couple months. And he said, well, what do you suggest? I said, can we wait till July 1st? July 1st, the plant has gone through its growth surge. Any pruning you do in July, guess what? It stays there. Any pruning of that hedge you do in April, and it goes, whatever. You're like, wait, I just pruned you, or I just paid to have you pruned, and now I got to pay again. So therefore, thinking about, okay, if I'm going to pay somebody once a year to prune my hedge, then I'm going to do it after its growth surge when it gets hot. When it gets hot. You know, I actually was taught, I grew up in New England, and I was taught as a kid, you don't prune things in the fall because then they sprout new growth and then it gets frozen off. That's all folklore. The plant doesn't suddenly undo nighttime temperature, day length, all this other stuff and go, oh, let's start to grow. It just doesn't do that. It doesn't happen. So you really want to think about, all right, so what am I trying to do with those plants? And it kind of brings us back to fruit trees and where I started. The first thing on any plant in your landscape that you're going to want to do before you prune it is you're going to want to say, what's my objective here? And if my objective is flowers or fruit, which it usually is on a fruit tree, I mean, we grow fruit trees, why? Because I want the apples or I want the plums. Not because the flowers are pretty, which they are pretty, but on the other hand, it doesn't work. So you have to ask yourself, on what wood does it fruit? And if it fruits on spurs, and a spur is a short and compressed stem, it's a little stub. If it fruits on spurs, then it has to take a couple of years, a year or two, certainly by year 2, to produce the spurs. So you go in there and you do all this pruning, and then the stupid tree doesn't fruit. It's not the tree, it's what you did to it. It's the time of year that you pruned it. Now, a peach, on the other hand, blooms on second-year wood, but only second-year wood. So you do a lot of heavy pruning on peaches because it's going to put out new growth and that's going to fruit. Okay, so it just depends on what type of wood the tree fruits on. Okay, so let's go back. Any questions on a year in the life of a plant? I think this is helpful because next time when you prune, you can think, okay, what's going on with this plant here? And what do I want it to do? And some plants are different. Roses, for instance. Why do we keep pruning roses? Because we want lots of flowers. And so they do grow, they bloom, cut it back. They do grow, they bloom, they cut it back. You know, you do a lot of cutting. But when do you do your extensive pruning on roses? March, after we've had some hard freezes. Ted?
Can you talk about your fertilizing strategy for your property? Like how you manage your fertility?
So fertilizing strategy for me, the question was how do I manage fertilizing strategy? My desire is to not fertilize once established. And we have to put that in our head. Even drought-tolerant plants are not drought-tolerant the first couple of years. It has to go through a couple winters because remember, plants, that's why this is such a great time of year to plant, because plants are going to continue to establish. You know, I have a son-in-law who's putting in new grass seed, and I said, you got till October 15th to get that grass seed in. And he said, why? And I said, because October 15th gives you 2 weeks till we have our first frost in November, which we've already had our first frost. And then it will grow all winter long, and grass that you plant in October, you'll be playing on in June. Grass that you plant in April, May, you'll be playing on the following April or May. So that's why it's important. So that was a really bird walk, wasn't it? My fertilizing strategy in my yard is once things are established, I don't fertilize it. I don't rake off leaves. I add a lot of organic matter. I use chips as mulch because I'm trying to improve soil structure in my gardens. I do fertilize with nutrients. I do restore nutrients in my vegetable garden, in my berry patches, my apples. I do some, very little, because they're established trees. And I test soil once a year, see what's going on, where there's deficiencies, and then add nutrients to the vegetable garden. Because what we're doing in a vegetable garden is really, you know, we're taking off. We can't just say, well, the leaves will take care of it, or the grass clippings will take care of it, or the organic matter will take care of it. You know, we're adding nutrients to round them out and get better production, because my goal for my vegetable garden is production, not because I want to weed my vegetable garden.
When do you apply them to your vegetable garden, your fertilizer?
So when do I apply to my vegetable garden? So the really thing you want to think about is 2 major categories: synthetic fertilizers and organic fertilizers. Organic fertilizers, much of what's in an organic fertilizer is tied up in microbial activity in your soil. Microbial activity is tied up in what? Temperature, water availability, oxygen levels. So therefore, good soil structure improves microbial activity, which is going to help. And the funny thing about this microbial activity is that they're most active during the active growing season. And when are the plants in need? During the active growing season. Whereas if you put on a bag of 16 and you put it on now, plants don't really need it The nitrates will make them green up, but most of it's going to be washed down through the ground profile, through the water. Is that where you're going with that?
Yeah, so do you, like for your vegetable garden then, do you wait until, April?
To test?
May? No, to start applying your...
Right. I start applying, let's see, I do a lot of planting. I do some early planting. Of course, I've done garlics and stuff already, but I do some the bulk of the planting in April. Okay, so probably right around April is when I've done my testing earlier, and I've gotten my nutrients from you, and then I apply them probably April, working them into the soil. Okay, and I'm not a big till person. I'm not tilling them. I'm just working them in and scratching them in. Okay? Okay. Any other questions? Yes?
So do you ever use Osmocote?
I do use Osmocote in container plants, like fuchsias that are in a basket, something like that. Usually a container that I really want a lot of color in or something like that, I may use Osmocote in something like that. But that's really, I don't use it in the garden. I don't use it in ornamental plantings per se, but I use it in fuchsias because some of those are pretty heavy feeders and it's a little 12-inch container. Needs a lot of nutrients. Yep. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about talk about pruning in general, and we'll keep tying it back to fruit trees. Okay, pruning in general. Okay, this is an apple tree. Oh, let me digress. Let me talk about this for one more second. This year was a good year for fruit trees. Do you agree? Good year. We had good fruit this year. Last year, not so much. Last year was horrible. We had a terrible month of March where we had a lot of things blooming, and the bees just said, it's too cold, I'm not going out there. I'm sorry. So we had a lot of fruit that never got pollinated, a lot of flowers that never got pollinated. So last year was a terrible year, and again, there's pockets, and again, some of my fruit trees, I have 50 fruit trees, so some of the fruit trees did produce fruit. It was light, and it was always the later blooming apples that did produce fruit. The early blooming apples, the plums, the cherries, some of the pears, forget it. I didn't get anything. On some trees, there was nothing. And that was because of the climate, right? That was because of what was going on. There was a year about 10 years ago where we had a very, very bad fruit year. I was living on the east side, had a horrible, horrible fruit year, and I kept thinking, why? We've had such a great spring. We had a great spring, the bees were out, it was warm and it was sunny, I don't understand it. Then I went back and looked at my notes. We had had a very hard freeze in November. So when the leaves were like this, even before this, when the leaves were turning yellow and stuff, we had a killing frost and we had snow, and it lasted about a week. And you thought, oh no, winter's going to be horrible. Then it turned out winter wasn't that bad. But it was interrupting this reclamation of nutrients that totally impacted the following spring's produce. Isn't that interesting when you think about that? And so weather, climate, temperatures are so impactful on a fruit tree, particularly on a fruit tree. So anyway, it's kind of a side note. Okay, so this is an apple tree. And we know, I'm going to try to follow my notes here, we know that many plants have an apical bud, right? They have a terminal bud, and this terminal bud has hormones in it, and these hormones control all the growth down here. This hormone in here says, hey, I'm in charge, nobody goes out, we're going up. Got me? And so these guys grow and grow and grow, and eventually when they get farther away, their impact on the lower lateral buds is lessened and lessened to the point where they produce these little shoots. Okay? By removing this terminal bud, what do? You remove that hormone that's in that bud and the branch sprouts, right? I mean, take a fuchsia, take anything, you're like, I want it to bush out. You pinch it, it goes, and all those little branches have terminal buds as well, and it controls that, and so they're controlling their own side branch, and their own side branch, their own side branch. All right, so we know we've got a terminal bud, we've got lateral buds in here, we have nodes. The node is where the bud meets the stem, and we've got the inner node, which is the distance between nodes. Okay, so this is an apple tree, and so I'm going to bounce around a little. I hope this is okay. This is an apple tree. Most apples produce fruit on spurs, okay, and you're comfortable with that word spur. And cherries produce on spurs, plums produce on spurs, pears produce on spurs. But the biggest frustrating thing that people don't understand is that apples produce fruit on spurs. How do you get a spur to produce? I mean, how do you get it to create spurs? All right, plants have a growth surge. So this is my apple branch, and because you can't see it from where you're sitting, here's a terminal bud. Here's side buds, side buds, side buds, side buds, side buds. Then as you go down the stem, you see a group of concentric circles right here. Okay? You can't see it, but I can see it. It's right here. So I go from tip to this little concentric. This little concentric is called bud scale scars. Okay? So this is the bud scale scar, or scars. The terminal bud, keep in mind the terminal bud is what? Enclosed in bud scales. In the spring, the bud scales all drop off, right? And the terminal starts to grow. This is last year's growth where the bud scale scars were, where the terminal bud scale scars were. So from here to here is how much it grew last year. So from here to here is how much it grew last year. Now notice this branch. Can you guys in the back see that against the whiteboard maybe? Notice on this branch, we're starting to get these little spurs. Spurs, really keep that in mind. What is a spur? A short and compressed stem, meaning it took a stem that's growing and someone went, it looks like someone squashed it. And so you have very close nodes, internodes, nodes, internodes, nodes, internodes. Spurs are built scientifically to hold weight, like an apple. An apple's heavy. And if you put an apple here, it goes like this. So that's why these spurs are built tougher, okay? So terminal to bud scale scars. If I tip this, I go in the spring, and I go, oh yeah, I don't know how to prune my apples, but I love my new shears that I got. So I think tip, 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 tip. And so we tip that whole plant. How does the plant respond if we tip that? That's right, is it going to grow spurs? No, it's going to do this. It's going to grow like that, right? And then it stops. Okay, so if I leave it untipped, the farther away this apical meristem, now it's starting to grow in the spring. It's like, hey, guys, we can grow. She's gone. So what happens? You start to get spur growth right here, spur growth right here, spur growth right here, spur growth right here. Once a spur, always a spur. A spur is anatomically different than a branch. So your goal with your fruit trees is to produce spurs, because if you produce spurs, you're producing fruit. Once a spur, always a spur. So therefore, you're saying, yeah, but then you've got this branch and it's going to be kind of weak, and if this gets heavily weighted with fruit, it's going to start bending down. Okay, the next year I can go back. Say I haven't tipped, just like the one in my hand. I've not tipped this. And here it is, March, April, May. Let this thing grow. These things will start to produce spurs. If I keep letting this grow, I'll get spurs on here, but then I can go back and I can actually cut it to here to firm up, to toughen up this wood. to make this wood thicker, to be able to handle the weight of the fruit trees. Now, how's the plant going to respond? Well, it's going to grow some here, grow some here. These are going to, spurs grow, you know what spurs grow? They grow more spurs. So you end up with a spur network in this whole area. This will eventually, over time, 7 years, 10 years, you'll start to have spurs on all of these. And so you end up with quite a bit of spurs. And so then you're going to get fruit. If you walk away with nothing else, walk away with tipping discourages spur production. I never read that in a book. And I was that classic organic gardener in his 20s, got his 5 acres, put in a ton of fruit trees, woo-hoo. Did the thinning, read the book, degree in horticulture, the whole bit. And then right before I went in, I thought, oh, tip, 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 tip. Oh, that feels better. Tip, tip. I've tipped everything. Stupid plants never produce fruit. Why? I thought, I'm in the industry and I can't get my fruit trees to fruit. This is embarrassing. Why can't I get... I read books. None of the books look like my trees. Oh yeah, this is really clear. I get it. You stand there with your shears and you go, I have no idea what I'm doing. You read the book, I have no idea what I'm doing. What I learned through self-examination was tipping discourages spur production. It's so life-changing. Tipping discourages spur production. If I leave it untipped, I keep getting more spurs and more spurs and more spurs. Even if I did tip this back, say I tipped it all the way back and I got a lot of growth here and here, well then I can now go back and I can remove the lower stuff, let this guy grow, let him grow some spurs up here, and then I'll tip him again. Because your goal is always to raise the head of the fruit tree, the apple tree, so they're not going like this, which they do because the weight of the fruit can do it. And initially you may end up doing some fruit thinning. As painful as fruit thinning is, it's very rewarding because you're like, well, at least I'm going to get a lot of fruit. I did so much fruit thinning this year and still had way too much fruit. Okay, so with fruit trees, if they produce fruit on spurs, tipping discourages spur production. Yes?
The cause of those branches that go vertical.
Okay, very good. Water sprouts and suckers. Okay, so a sucker comes from below the graft, on the ground, from the root system. That's a sucker. A water sprout is a vertical branch growing like that, right? It just comes straight up and they're like this and you're like, man, that's not good. They were called water sprouts because the turn of the century, the last century, they thought they were hooked into the water system of the plant. And that's why they grew so fast. So my theory on dealing with water sprouts, and has worked, and this ties in with your year in the life of a plant. You've got this horizontal branch, and it goes like this every year. And you prune it every year. And when do you prune it? February. You know, why do you prune in February? Because you can see branching structure. That's why that's a great time of year to plant. I can see all the branching structure. So you take this water sprout and you cut them all off. Plant says, ha, great, and does it again, right? So what I would do is I would take it, all these water sprouts, and in February, I'd cut them all off. It responds, doing it all over again. And then in July of that same year, I go back and cut them all off again. They're thin, they're like pencils or thick marker pens. They can be pretty thick. Cut them off again. How is the plant going to respond? It's not putting on anymore. You will be on from then on in, you will be on an every July cycle for your water sprouts. Okay, and that July cycle will start to reduce the number of water sprouts every year. I know that when you're on a February cycle of water sprouts, it just feels like it's getting worse every year. They just produce more and more and more and more, and you're like, stupid tree. But it's just responding. So get them done in February, March, and then do them again when it's hot, July, August.
You cut him all the way back
and you're cutting them all the way back to, good question, look on your trees. Always look on your trees. Here's the trunk, and picture the trunk being sideways. Here's the trunk, it comes down, and you have this. Right? Can you picture that on a tree? This is the same thing whether it's a water sprout or whether it's a branch. So this is called the branch collar. This section right here, this is a switching zone from where the xylem and the phloem go this way, and the xylem and phloem go up this way along the side of it. And so you get this swollen area right here. Within this collar are hormones that help the plant seal it off and start to wall off infection. So therefore, say this is a heavy branch. My first cut would be here, my second cut would be here to take off the weight. Now the thing is done. Now all I'm dealing with is a little stub. My next cut is going to be here, just slightly, just to go through the bark, right here. Use a different color. So it's going to be right here, and then the rest is going to be right here like that. Now I'm leaving on, I've had people say to clients, say, you're leaving on all these stubs. No, I'm not leaving on stubs, I'm leaving on branch collars. Branch collars contain chemical compounds that will wall off from infection. Because what is fungus? Fungus uses all of this wood as sugar. And so if I were to cut it straight, make a flush cut straight down my tree and go in here, look at what goes on now. Oh crap, I'm past the branch, but I'm into the main trunk. I have done a major wound to that plant. And what's going to happen is fungus is going to attack right in here and start to get into this wood and in this wood. And if it's a soft barked plant like an alder or a cottonwood or a willow or even maples, then you're going to get some rot in here. But by leaving the branch collar on, and your point was, what about those, how flush do you cut those? You're cutting to collars. And because really on all these little branches right here, they all, you'll look at them, they all have collars. Even all these water sprouts have a little bit of swollen area and then they go up. So they have collars too. You know that if you cut to here, well, there's buds here, and instead of one cut, you'll have 4 next year, times 10. Now you got 40 cuts. Okay, it just exponentially starts to increase. So the collar is a real important thing to start looking on your trees. Spruce is amazing. Spruce, it's so funny. Here's the tree, here's a spruce.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I've done a spruce, and it looks like this, and you're like, you've left that 8-inch stub on that tree. That's the collar. Yes, I've left that 8-inch stub on the tree. No paint, no tree heel, no pruning aid. Even though it's still on the market, they've been shown scientifically that they trap in moisture and organisms. So what do? Let it go by itself. Trees bleed, don't they, in June? Maples bleed in June. If the bleeding disturbs you, then do it in July. Or do it in March when they're not bleeding. Okay, there is no scientific evidence that this bleeding, which is literally water, most of it, but sweet water, if you've ever tasted it, is a problem to the plant. It's not. Yes?
A little bit off fruit trees, but on Japanese maple, is there an ideal time to prune?
Yes,
And it is.
twice. But I won't ask you when you did it because, anyway, but, okay, so the ideal, I was looking at mine yesterday. I have a beautiful lacy leaf maple that the former owners took a chainsaw to. And so I either decided I was going to rip it out because it was so horrible what they did. My wife said, no, why don't you just, let's work with it. And so now it's beautiful. It's starting, but there's still a problem. And I looked at it yesterday and I thought, you know, all the leaves are off now. From now on, I could do it. I literally was combing out dead leaves. There's no foliage on it now anymore. So I could do it now, or I could do it in January or February. As long as it's not freezing, you can do it. So I do it twice. I'll do it in dormancy, because I see the branching structure and I can see what I want and what is crossing is okay, what crossing is not. And then I'll do it again in July. And I do it in July because especially lacy leaf maples turn into big mop heads. They turn into mushrooms. And it's like, what a blob. And I uplight mine at night. And so when you uplight it, you can't even see it because it's just like purple. It's just a blob. It looks like a gumdrop. So what I do is in July, I go through and I window it. And I take out branches so I can see the trunk and see the branching structure and see the uplight that I have on it at night, so it actually gives me some texture. So I prune twice. Okay, I prune them in dormancy and then I prune in July after the growth surge. Okay? Yes?
While you're talking about lace leaf maples, what, on mine, the branches on the end are dying. What's causing it?
Branches on the end of its Japanese maple are dying. What's causing it? Often Japanese maples kill parts of it because there's so much shade. And so you might have little twigs, little branches that are dying. Is that what it is?
Yeah, usually at the
Lots of, and you can tell the color of the wood is different, isn't it? It's a light brown. Yeah, it's white. You can go through and just forget even using your shears. You can just break them off with your fingers and do that. So Japanese maples, lacy leaf maples, are susceptible to crowding themselves out and shade. Again, another reason to prune in July, because you're trying to let light in, let light in, let light in. You'll get less dieback. So that's a good time to do it. They do get verticillium, which is a fungal disease which is in the plant, and it will take out a major branch or a major branch. And if you have that, it's probably going to, it may kill the tree. Trees can live with it, but they become pretty unsightly, and so you'll probably have to take it out, take out some of the soil and put in something that's resistant to verticillium, which there are, which would not be a Japanese maple. So it just depends on what's going on there. So, so let's go back to pruning general and pruning trees. You know there's two types of cuts in the world. Oh, this is a great one I brought in. There's a heading cut, where if I were to tip this would be a heading cut, right? I would tip it and it would respond by going, right? That's a heading cut. A thinning cut is where I have a branch and I take this entire branch back to the point of origin. If I do thinning cuts, it invigorates the rest of the whole plant. If I do heading cuts, I get a growth surge right from where I cut. And so what should be your goal with fruit trees and many other trees in your landscape? It should be the words light and air. Keep that mantra in your head, light and air, light and air, light and air, meaning you are doing, most of your cuts will be thinning cuts. Most of your cuts will be thinning, where you'll take the branch back to the point of origin.
How about evergreens?
Specifically, what type of evergreen?
Well, just name them, I've got,
Like Douglas fir?
yeah, huge ones.
So those are going to be thinning cuts. Huge Douglas firs, you would taking the branch back to the point of origin. Say you wanted to make it less prone to
Just thin it and lower it a bit.
lowering a bit. You have to be careful in topping a tree. Lowering a bit is okay if it's a young tree. If it's a big old tree and we lowered it, it's 100 feet tall and we lowered it by 30 feet, that'd be topping, right? And topping, let's talk topping for a second. Topping is a detrimental practice to the tree, because when you've got a tree that's 100 feet tall, you've got this big old tree, and this big old tree stores a lot of food in its root system. A lot of food in its root system. And it has an apical meristem, and it's growing all this way. By cutting the tree right here, number one, it doesn't have any branch collar to heal over. And number two, the roots starve because of lack of nutrients, because all these leaves, you've taken off a third of the plant, and all these leaves can't feed the root system, so you start to get root death. So you start to get fungal growth in the roots, so the tree becomes unstable. So I often tell people, if the tree is a problem tree to you, then take it out and put in something that's not as
This
much
one's
of a
sort of
problem.
like a bush, huge.
Okay.
It's higher than this roof, and it's sort of bushy, and it kind of goes up over the top of my house, which is,
And it's not a Douglas fir, it's just another conifer, another evergreen.
only it's big.
like a Hanoi.
Okay, like a Hinoki cypress.
Hinoki.
Like a Hinoki cypress. So you can,
I gotta thin it or something because the snow gets on it.
okay.
It makes a lot.
And if it gets too tall, sometimes, you know, we can teach you out of a book all this stuff about why to not top a tree like a Hinoki cypress next to your house, and then you say, but it gets in the gutter and it's really annoying and I need to lower it or I need to open it up. So you can drop crotch it. Drop crotch is where you basically, if there's a branch coming out here and a branch coming out here, you can take it to this branch right here and let this one take over, okay? You can also reduce this one a little bit and reduce that one. When you get a big old tree big old shrub, which is turning into a tree because it's up to your gutters and stuff like that, you can remove branches back to their origin. You can remove the top back to a branch, a strong branch that's going out there. What you want to avoid doing,
It has little green berries on it sometimes.
okay, what you want to avoid doing is shearing it. Okay, you want to have somebody reduce it so that when they're done with it, you go, wow, that just looks a little smaller. Instead of, whoa, you really pruned that, didn't you? Those are two different reactions. And there's no reason why you can't take that conifer back, have someone take it down,
But
and
the root's as big as round as you.
the root is,
Yeah.
might be time for a stump grinder. Yeah, it might be time for a tree. So that, you know, we really have no options. Your options are to, I mean, you have several options, but it's just a matter of what do I want to do. You can thin it, you can lower it, you want it to look nice for you still.
Yeah.
And so get someone who's trained, someone who maybe a certified arborist, somebody who knows what they're doing, as opposed to someone who's the cheapest. That's the problem. My neighborhood is full of people that are the cheapest. And I look around and I go, wow, they've just pruned all their heaths. Funny, they're going to bloom in the fall and in the winter, and they've just sheared everything. Or what they did to my next door neighbor. This was done by a service. And they lollipopped all of her fruit trees. And I see this, and she does it every year. So I think you got to get people who know what they're doing and who are professionals. You pay a little more for them, you do. But you're going to be happier because there's no reason why that tree that you're talking to the corner could probably still look really nice with someone knowing what they're doing and how to prune it. You could reduce it. I've reduced plants easily in half and have them still, well, I can't see it, so I don't know, but you know, you can reduce it significantly so that it still would look good, okay? Other questions at all?
Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things I wanted to, getting late, am I okay? Are we okay,
We're okay.
time-wise?
Yes.
Okay,
I mean,
Stay.
I think, I'm guessing people probably have questions about rhododendrons.
yep,
I don't know if that's a popular plant.
okay, so let me end with a couple things, and then we can go from question to question to question. One of the things that's on here, before I get into this one, is right plant, right place. Isn't that the truth? You know, you want to think about, okay, before I buy something, before I plant something, how big is this going to get? How big is this going to get? What's its maturity going to be? And can I handle that? You know, I love, you know, Ted said I wrote a book. Well, I really had a good time writing page 15 because it shows that in your mind's eye, you have this garden in your mind of what you want it to look like. But when we plant it, it looks like this. And I just did a new garden installation in my yard, in my own garden, and I thought, wow, it looks so bare. I can't wait for 5 years. It's gonna, because it needs to grow in. Now, my daughter, on the other hand, living in Woodinville, I went to her house a couple weeks ago for dinner, and she's got into plants all of a sudden. And man, they were so close together. I said, well, you know, these are really going to grow. And she said, I know what you're thinking, and I know what you're going to say. I'm planning on moving every other plant. I said, perfect. I love your garden. It looks so good. All the colors, all the textures, everything was beautiful. In 3 years, she's going to have to be moving every other plant. She said, I'm ready. I hear you. I hear what you're saying. I thought, well, you know,
She's young.
she's 30. Yeah, I mean, why not? I could do that too. At my age, I'm thinking, oh, I don't want to do that. I look at mine and just think, oh, I hope I live long enough to see this thing fill in, you know, that kind of a thing. So anyway, so right plant, right place.
I'm not the only person who thinks that.
Oh yeah, this I want to show. I brought this in specifically. This is a pear tree. Okay, what do you notice? Lichens, mosses, lots of spurs. Oh, good point. So lots of spurs,
And the lichen.
lichens and mosses. How many of you have lichens and mosses on your fruit trees? Anybody? All right, I'm here to make you unhappy. Lichens and mosses. And this is my observation, my theory, my conclusion. I've listened to a lot of professionals on this, and there is some things that lichens and mosses actually leach nutrients into the soil, and there's some beneficials there, true. But my observation is noticed is that when you see lichens and mosses, first of all, if you go to the whole rainforest, lichens and mosses are why? They're there because of environmental. They're there because of rain, because of shade, because of darkness. And so we get a lot of moss simply due to exposure. But what do you do when you have a fruit tree that's in full sun, hot blazing sun, and it's covered with lichens and mosses? You don't say, well, we live in the Pacific Northwest, and it's true, but it's in full sun. So why do we have lichens and mosses? Also, look on your fruit trees and see if you have a lot of cracking on your branches. Like this is a thick branch and you've got this cracking going this way. I studied under a professor and we were talking about cracking of trees, and I said, I have cracking on my trees. He said, root stress. Root stress. Root stress. Root stress that may have happened years ago when it was transplanted. Maybe they didn't spread the roots out. Maybe they kept it in the pot and then put the pot in the ground and, didn't score the root ball. That may 20 years later be causing stress because the roots are actually kind of girdling each other. Well, my theory on this is lichens and mosses are a sign of stress. They're a sign of stress of the tree. It could be that root stress. It could be soil compaction. It could be, I took out a tree yesterday. I took this tree out yesterday. And one of the problems was, and I did this, is that I mounded, don't you hate when that happens? I know, it's like, I can't get it off, I can't get it off. So what I did on this tree, I hadn't thought about what I did on this tree. I just did it.
It looks pretty though.
It does look pretty. Yeah. It didn't produce fruit at all this year.
Okay.
So what it did, I put on a foot of chips. Why? Because I had to get rid of them, and because there was lots of reasons, but I put a foot of chips on this tree. You should have on your trees, at the base of your trees, you should have what's called trunk flare, right? Trees have a trunk flare. This tree, the chips are up to here. It responded this year by producing no fruit, by getting rust, which it never got rust. It's a tree that's probably 50, 60 years old and was terribly butchered by a previous owner. So the tree has been stressed and has had lichens and mosses on it for years. And so I made a decision, look at you. You're such a mess. And I compounded it by adding all those chips on there. I think it's time for a new tree. See ya. So he's now took off ground level, and I'm very happy with all the light I have there now. It's like, wow, that's really much nicer. So, but when you see lichens and mosses on trees that are in full sun, think stress. So then what does that mean? What can I do for it? Well, you can mulch it with chips, arborist chips. You can add some organic fertilizer to it. But if you're putting chips, don't put a foot of chips. We're talking a couple inches. That's enough. Yes?
I was just going to say, the lichens don't really hurt.
Nope.
They, some people are concerned, it's killing the plant.
Right. I better put some dormant oil on it because it'll kill the lichens and mosses. No, you don't need to do that. The lichens and mosses, you're right, they're not a parasite. They're not a problem. My theory is that the pH of the bark changes when the plant is under stress, providing a good environment for these guys to grow. Yes?
I have a hazel, and half of the tree has lichens, and the other half doesn't.
Wow, interesting. Why is that? I have no idea.
Yeah.
The older you get, the more comfortable you get saying, I have no idea. I probably would open it up and then thin it out. I would be aware, that you've got some really good observations in that half of the tree, what is that half towards?
It's on the north side.
The half on the north side. Ooh, that's a good indicator, isn't it? Because that's light. So I think I would try to stabilize it. First, this during dormancy, I would probably take out a third of the plant. Light and air. Those hazelnuts, is it a contorted one?
No.
Oh, it's just a regular.
A native.
Okay, it's a native one. Oh, that's really interesting. Is it really thick?
No. It's real open.
Okay, so it's real open, so therefore it's not going to be a light and air. Then go to the soil. What's going on in the soil?
Dry.
Dry. Okay, so I might try mulching with arborist chips. I might try adding some organic fertilizer.
I've done arborist chips.
Okay, and nothing still. Interesting. Yeah.
Could that be a vascular issue, like a wilt or something?
Are all the leaves coming out normal when they come out?
It slowly looks like it's dying on that side.
Oh, interesting.
And it throws suckers.
Right,
And I've been cutting the suckers off.
right.
And I didn't know if that was doing.
No, I think that's okay. Wow, I don't know. I think I'd end up having, I would almost want to, I don't know whether something's going on in the root system or if something's going on in the top growth. I probably would cut out the affected areas and get rid of them off-site. Anything else? Yes?
Raspberries.
Good.
According to what you said in February.
Okay.
And then again,
Great question, and I brought a raspberry over here for that very reason, because I was hoping we would talk raspberries, and then I forgot, so thanks for bringing this up. The first question you have to ask is, are they ever-bearing raspberries, or are they single crop? What are they?
well, I'm not sure I know the difference. But
Perfect, I was hoping you'd say that, thank you. I'll pay you later for that one, that was really, what is the difference? Okay, so this is bearing fruit right now, isn't it?
yeah.
This is considered an ever-bearing raspberry. Ever-bearing raspberries produce fruit twice a year. They produce fruit on new canes coming up that bloom in the summer and produce fruit in the fall. Then if I cut this back, because the top's going to die down, this same cane will produce fruit in June, and then that cane will die. So raspberry roots are perennial, the canes are biennial, meaning all canes of raspberries live for 2 years and then they die. So let's talk single crop raspberry real quickly. If we're okay on time. I don't want to have you guys say, get out of here. I think we're done with him. So let's talk raspberries. Let's talk single crop raspberries, such as what? Such as Meeker, such as Tulamine. Tulamine is by far my most favorite raspberry. The quality of the fruit is incredible. So it grows its first year. That's called the primocane, and it does nothing. It just grows. It might grow 6 feet. It doesn't bloom, doesn't fruit, doesn't do anything. Okay? So it might produce all these canes coming up here. You've got all these canes, about 18 inches, and they're like this. And this is Tulamine. I put in a trellis, which is a 4x4 trellis. I put a cross on it. I put in a 4x4 post and a 2x4 cross, and I put wires between them so it looks like a clothesline. And then in the time of year to do your pruning is going to be February. Okay, February is when I'm going to prune my single crop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take these guys and I'm going to bend them here and I'm going to tie them. Take this one, bend it here and tie them. Take it here, bend it and tie it. Okay? Then I take this one, bend it, tie it here. Take this one, bend it, tie it here. Take this one, bend it, tie it here. Looks great in a picture. It actually does work. Same thing, maybe I only have one on this one because it only had one cane. Maybe this one has two and I tie it here and I tie it here. Now notice when I tie it, what am I doing? I'm tipping it. That's really key. You want to tip it. You want to bring this thing over. It may go all the way down to here. You tip it. Even if it only goes to here, I tip it. Why? Because that takes that hormone out of the apical meristem and causes fruit to go here, 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 here. So you get fruit all the way along here. And I want my trellis to be, I like to have them 6 feet. Because what happens, they come out about 18 inches. And so you say, well, that's too high for me. It won't be once these guys start producing fruit coming down this way. Okay? So now they produce fruit year 2. Now you're in your 2nd year, right? They produce fruit. While they are producing fruit, you have new canes coming up all over the place. I try to keep them inside my box. Keep them inside my box. You got new canes coming up. That's next year's fruit. Keep those canes growing, keep them protected. They're growing, they're growing, they're growing. Now in February, and I always tie mine with jute so that I can just cut them and then they drop off, cut and they drop off. I take these guys all the way down to the ground. So I remove all these old canes that produce fruit, and then I tie the new ones over here. So every year in February, I'm cutting it down, and then I'm reattaching. Now, if you're like me, as soon as I'm done fruiting, like in September, I like to take out the old primicanes. Why? Because I like to give the other ones space. I like to give the other ones some room. So I will prune them. I'll prune them also at that time in August as well. So this is a single crop. If it's an everbearing, like this guy, what I like to do, you're not going to want to hear this, I cut him to the ground every year. I cut him to the ground every year. I still have a trellis like this. And I cut him to the ground every year because the taste of these in July is nothing compared to tulamines. But in September, October, who is complaining about the taste of these? It's a fresh raspberry. And it tastes so good. And this really came home for me when I had 5 kids at home, and they were little kids, and they wanted dinner, they wanted to hurry up, you know, it's like, go outside and eat something. Just go pick something, get out of the kitchen. Just go outside and eat. Get out of here. Just go eat something. They would never pick my ever-bearing raspberries. And I remember saying, well, I've got 2 huge rows, 75 feet long. Why aren't you picking the ever-bearing? They're like, they don't even taste good. And then I started thinking, they don't even taste good. And so I did a real taste test on the July of an everbearing versus July of a single crop. Holy smokes. It was such a difference. Why am I wasting my time on these everbearing? However, in August and September and October, these everbearing are the best raspberries you'll ever have. You don't have the others to compare it to. So that's why I like growing both. I don't commingle them because it's really hard to tell which is which. So I don't commingle. But a good rule of thumb is if you have a cane, you say, well, I don't know whether I have everbearing or single crop. If you're getting fruit right now, it's everbearing. If you're getting fruit on it, then it's an everbearing raspberry because they do not produce fruit at this time of year. And notice the position, they're at the terminals. That's an everbearing raspberry versus a single crop. Okay?
So you don't prune just a portion of that?
I know, and you could. You certainly could. A lot of people who have I've talked to people with everbearing. The thing you learn with gardeners is that you don't complain with, you don't teach them how to do anything because they're going to do what they want to do anyway. And I don't argue with success. And I've had people say, I have everbearing and they are the best raspberries ever had. Perfect, keep growing them. I'm not here to convince you. But you certainly could. If this was my everbearing, and I know people that do this, in the spring, they just cut the tops off. Why? Because these die back to here, and then these are going to produce fruit. These are all going to produce fruit. And if you have a variety of everbearing that you love, then manage it that way. And that works out fine.
So you just cut back
to a node right here. It'll tell you
you still have fruit below.
It'll tell you in the spring, it'll actually die back during the winter. And then you'll be able to say, oh, it's dead to here. Oh, it's dead to here. And then you cut it.
What do you do about the fruit fly maggots?
Well, yeah, there's a little fruit fly That's a problem with raspberries, and so what I do is I do traps. I take a cottage cheese container and I drill holes in the side, put the lid on it, and I put in apple cider vinegar and one drop of dish soap. And they go in those holes and they drown. And the dish soap keeps them. So you mean on raspberries, or are you talking about apple maggots? Apple maggots, another story. So apple maggots, which this was, for me, this was a great year for apple maggots, meaning I didn't have any. And this was the first year that I took Christmas balls. Of course, you know, I bought those little footy things that you can put them on, and I thought, I am retired and I don't have time for this. I used to think, well, when I retire, I'll have time for that. But now it's like, this is a waste. I am not doing this. Who gave me these? So now I take red Christmas balls and I paint them with tanglefoot. And I hang them out, 4 of them per tree. Wow, that worked great this year. The female fly, it's a fly, and she sees the red and says, yes, red apple. And then can't go anywhere, so she dies there. Because what she does is she lays her little ovipositor in the apple and puts an egg in there, and the egg hatches into a maggot, which causes apple maggot. And that's why you don't want to transport apple maggot fruit, because the apple maggots are in there, and then they hatch, and then they fly around. They're a fly. And so that's why I use bright red, cheap Christmas balls, painted with tanglefoot, hang them in your tree, around. Tanglefoot's a very, you can buy it, looks like rubber cement. Remember the old rubber cement days in the little glass thing? And you paint it on it, and it's really sticky.
Is it in the garden department?
Yeah, it's in the garden department.
There's nothing you can put in the soil to kill the overwintering.
No, because they're a fly. So there's nothing in the soil you can put in there, because this fly, you put it in the soil right around there. Number one, you're going to ingest the chemical that you just put in the soil. But number 2, the fly may be coming from your neighbors or maybe coming from all around, because it's a fly. So it's not a maggot living in the soil. Okay?
How long does it last?
How long what?
Do you have to do it every year?
Tanglefoot?
The balls.
Oh, once a year. I threw them all out now.
I throw
Yeah.
them away because they're too sticky.
They're too sticky and gross, and I'm not going to clean them. And the weather has caused the red to come off, and it's just a gross mess. So yes,
That was the answer. You couldn't hear tanglefoot or tanglewood, so
tanglefoot.
tangle.
Yeah, tanglefoot. Yep. Okay,
Okay, I feel like we could
got
go
my
on.
cue. Okay.
I know we're already over on time.
Yeah, sorry.
And I have to go pick up my daughter in about 10 minutes. So
Okay,
thank you so much.
you bet. You bet. Thank you.